My phone buzzed at exactly 7:10 a.m. "Sis, Dad passed away this morning," my older sister said in a voice so cold it barely sounded human. "The lawyer already called. He left everything to me. You get nothing." Before I could answer, her husband laughed. "Looks like you're finally out of the family." For a second, I simply stared at the coffee steaming in front of me. The sunlight pouring through the kitchen window made the polished wooden table glow, while the smell of fresh toast filled the room. Across from me, my father calmly buttered another slice of bread, completely unaware of the performance happening over my phone. I didn't interrupt them. I didn't argue. I didn't even tell them they had made a terrible mistake. Instead, I quietly tapped the speaker button and placed my phone in the center of the table. My sister kept talking. "You always thought Dad loved you more. Guess you were wrong." Her husband chuckled again. "I hope you enjoyed pretending to be the favorite." My father slowly lowered his coffee cup. His eyebrows pulled together in confusion as he listened to every word. He looked at me, then at the phone, and finally leaned forward. His voice was calm, almost gentle. "That's strange," he said. A long silence followed. "Because I'm still alive." The laughter disappeared instantly. I could almost hear the color drain from their faces through the phone. No one spoke. Even the ticking clock on the kitchen wall suddenly sounded louder than their breathing. In that moment, I realized something heartbreaking. They hadn't called to mourn our father. They had called to celebrate what they believed was my loss. And they had no idea that the man they were trying to bury was listening to every single word. I wish I could say that call shocked me, but it didn't. What shocked me was how quickly my sister believed she had already won. She didn't hesitate. She didn't ask questions. She simply assumed that if there was an inheritance, it belonged to her alone and that I deserved nothing. Growing up, we had been completely different. She loved attention, appearances, and being the center of every family gathering. I preferred quiet conversations, hard work, and keeping my promises. Dad often told me, "Character isn't measured by what people say when you're in the room. It's measured by what they say when they think you're gone." At the time, I thought he was giving ordinary fatherly advice. Years later, I realized he had been preparing me for moments exactly like this. After our mother passed away, I became the one who drove Dad to doctor's appointments, helped with his paperwork, repaired things around his house, and spent weekends sharing simple meals with him. None of it felt like a sacrifice. He was my father, and being there for him never seemed like something that deserved recognition. My sister saw things differently. She appeared on birthdays, holidays, and whenever relatives were visiting. She always arrived with expensive gifts and carefully rehearsed smiles, making sure everyone noticed her generosity. Then she'd disappear for months without answering Dad's calls. Yet somehow, she always managed to convince people she was the devoted daughter. I never argued with her version of events. Defending myself felt like asking strangers to judge a life they had never witnessed. I believed that the truth didn't need constant advertising. It only needed time. That quiet approach made people underestimate me. Relatives assumed I was passive because I rarely raised my voice. My sister mistook my patience for weakness. Even her husband treated me like someone who would simply accept whatever happened. They never realized that silence isn't surrender. Sometimes silence is simply the decision to wait until the truth reveals itself, and when it does, it speaks louder than any argument ever could. Looking back, that phone call wasn't the beginning of the betrayal. It was simply the first time my sister stopped pretending. Over the previous 2 years, I had noticed the small changes. Whenever Dad mentioned my name, she would smile politely, then steer the conversation somewhere else. If he thanked me for fixing something around the house or helping with his finances, she'd quickly remind everyone about the expensive gifts she had bought him. She understood something that took me much longer to learn. People often remembered grand gestures more easily than quiet consistency. Family dinners became uncomfortable in subtle ways. She would save a seat beside Dad for herself, leaving me at the other end of the table. When relatives complimented my career or my patience, she'd laugh softly and say, "Well, some people have plenty of free time." The room usually filled with awkward chuckles, and I would simply smile and continue eating. Correcting her never seemed worth the argument. Her husband was even less careful. Whenever I arrived to help Dad with repairs, he'd glance around the house and joke, "Making sure your investment stays in good condition?" He'd laugh at his own comment while watching my reaction, hoping I'd finally lose my temper. I never gave him that satisfaction. I picked up my toolbox, finished what I came to do, and quietly left. Dad noticed more than I realized. Sometimes I'd catch him watching those exchanges without saying a word. His expression wasn't angry. It was thoughtful, almost as if he were putting another piece into a puzzle he had been solving for years. One evening, as I was leaving, he walked me to the front door. He rested a hand on my shoulder and said quietly, "You don't have to defend yourself against people who are busy revealing themselves." At the time, I thought he was simply comforting me. I didn't know he had already begun making decisions that would expose everyone's true character. And that morning, with one cruel phone call and one careless lie, my sister unknowingly stepped into the trap she had set for herself. The silence after my father's words lasted only a few seconds, but it felt much longer. Finally, my sister found her voice. "Dad?" she whispered. My father didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse her or demand an explanation. He simply said, "Come to the house. Both of you. We need to talk." She immediately began making excuses, claiming someone must have misunderstood, that she had received a confusing phone call from the lawyer. Her husband tried to laugh it off, but the confidence in his voice had vanished. Dad ended the call with a single sentence. "We'll discuss it when you get here." He placed the phone on the table and looked at me for a long moment. Then he sighed, not with anger, but with disappointment. "I've been expecting something like this," he admitted. Those words surprised me more than the phone call itself. He walked to his study and returned carrying a neat folder. Inside were copies of letters, text messages, and notes he had quietly kept over the years. There were unanswered messages asking my sister to visit, reminders she had ignored, and records showing who had actually been helping him manage his daily life. He hadn't collected them to punish anyone. He had simply wanted the truth documented. "I hoped I would never need these," he said. "But people reveal themselves when they think no one is watching." That was the moment something changed inside me. For years, I had believed staying silent meant enduring whatever came my way. I thought patience required accepting every insult without question. I finally understood the difference. Patience isn't allowing people to rewrite the truth. It's giving them enough time to expose themselves before you calmly reveal the facts. I didn't need revenge built on anger. I only needed to stand beside the truth while the lies collapsed under their own weight. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for my sister to change. I was ready to let her face the consequences of exactly who she had chosen to become. My father never believed in emotional confrontations. He believed in preparation. After breakfast, he called his attorney and asked him to come to the house that afternoon. There was no urgency in his voice, no trace of panic. He simply wanted every conversation that followed to be based on facts instead of accusations. He asked me to sit with him while we reviewed his estate documents. For years, I had helped him organize his records, pay household bills online, and keep copies of important paperwork. Every document was dated, every signature witnessed, and every update properly recorded. Nothing had been left to memory or guesswork. The attorney arrived carrying the original estate file. He confirmed that no one had contacted my sister that morning. No lawyer from his office had called anyone, and no changes had been made to Father's will. The story she told had been completely fabricated. Dad wasn't interested in embarrassing her. "I don't want revenge," he said quietly. "I want accountability." His attorney suggested that, before any discussion about inheritance continued, everyone should meet together with legal counsel present. That way, every statement would be heard by witnesses, and there would be no room for new versions of old stories. It was exactly the kind of approach Dad preferred. No shouting, no dramatic family arguments, just documented facts. Before my sister arrived, Dad made one final decision. He instructed his attorney to prepare a written record of everything that happened that morning, including the exact time of the phone call and what had been said while the speakerphone was on. Since I had been sitting across from him the entire time, both of us could truthfully confirm every detail. Watching him work so methodically taught me something valuable. Real strength isn't proving someone wrong through louder words. It's creating a situation where the truth speaks so clearly that no one can honestly deny it. For the first time, I wasn't worried about what my sister might say next. She had built her plan on a lie. We were building ours on evidence. My sister and her husband arrived just before noon. The confidence they had displayed over the phone was gone. They walked into the house with forced smiles, avoiding eye contact with me. My father greeted them politely and invited everyone into his study. where his attorney was already seated with a folder open on the desk. No one raised their voice. Dad simply nodded toward the attorney. "Let's begin with the phone call from this morning." My sister immediately repeated her story. She claimed someone claiming to be a lawyer had called her and informed her that Dad had died. She insisted she had been confused and emotional. The attorney calmly shook his head. "My office made no such call," he said. "Every outgoing call is documented. There is no record of anyone contacting you today." The room fell silent. Then my father spoke. "I also heard everything you said after you believed I was dead." He didn't sound angry. If anything, he sounded disappointed. He repeated her words exactly as she had spoken them. Her husband lowered his eyes. Neither of them interrupted, because they knew every sentence had been heard by the very man they thought was gone. My sister's excuses became weaker with every passing minute. "I didn't mean it like that. You misunderstood." I was in shock. But the words no longer mattered. The truth had already spoken for itself. Dad slowly reached for another folder and placed it in front of them. "I updated my estate plan several months ago," he said. "Not because of today, but because your actions over the years showed me who could be trusted." He explained that his decisions had been based on character, honesty, and consistent care rather than empty promises or appearances. The documents had been properly signed, witnessed, and finalized long before that morning. No dramatic announcement followed. No celebration, just the quiet realization that greed had cost them something far greater than money, their father's trust. As they left the house without another word, I watched the front door close behind them. For the first time in years, I felt no anger. Only peace. Because the most satisfying revenge wasn't watching them lose. It was watching the truth quietly win without ever having to raise its voice. News of what had happened spread through the family within a few days. Not because I told anyone. My father didn't either. The story traveled the way truth often does. Quietly, passed from one relative to another, after my sister tried to explain why our father had suddenly become distant. Unfortunately for her, every version she told left out one important detail. Dad had been alive, sitting across from me, listening to every word she believed he would never hear. When relatives visited him, they noticed the change. He was still polite to my sister, but the easy warmth that had once existed was gone. Trust, I realized, doesn't disappear in one dramatic moment. It fades after countless small choices, until one final act makes it impossible to ignore. Her husband stopped making sarcastic jokes whenever I was around. He rarely looked me in the eye anymore. There was nothing left to prove and nothing left to mock. The confidence he had worn so comfortably had quietly disappeared. Several relatives reached out to me. Some apologized for believing I had simply been the quiet one who never cared about recognition. Others admitted they had mistaken my silence for weakness. I accepted their words without bitterness. People can only judge what they see, and for years I had chosen not to defend myself. I couldn't blame them for believing the louder voice. The biggest change happened inside me. For the first time, I stopped feeling responsible for fixing relationships that other people were determined to break. I understood that self-respect sometimes means allowing others to live with the consequences of their own decisions instead of rescuing them from every mistake. Looking back, I don't remember that morning because of the lie my sister told. I remember it because it revealed something far more valuable than any inheritance. Character isn't tested when life is easy. It's revealed in the moments when people believe no one is listening. And sometimes the greatest victory isn't proving someone wrong. It's quietly letting the truth become impossible for anyone else to ignore. Months have passed since that morning, and life has become surprisingly quiet. Dad and I still have breakfast together every Sunday. We don't spend much time talking about what happened. There isn't much left to say. Some wounds heal through endless conversations. Others heal when you stop reopening them. My sister reached out a few times. The first messages were filled with explanations. Then came apologies. Later, she asked if we could go back to how things used to be. I never answered with anger. I simply told her that forgiveness and trust are not the same thing. I could forgive her for my own peace of mind, but trust had to be earned again through actions, not promises. Whether she chooses that path is no longer my responsibility. As for my father, he seems lighter now. The uncertainty he carried for years is gone. He no longer wonders who truly cares about him or who only cares about what he owns. Painful as that morning was, it gave him something valuable: clarity. It gave me clarity too. For years, I believed being kind meant accepting disrespect in silence. Now I understand that real kindness includes respecting yourself enough to let the truth stand on its own. You don't have to chase people, argue with them, or prove your worth to those determined to misunderstand you. Life moves forward. Dad still laughs over his morning coffee. I still help him around the house. Not because I expect recognition, but because love was never a transaction. It never depended on a signature, a document, or the promise of an inheritance. When I think back to that phone call at 7:10 a.m., I no longer remember the lie. I remember the quiet voice across the breakfast table saying, "That's strange, because I'm still alive." In the end, the greatest revenge wasn't exposing a lie. It was living with such honesty that the truth exposed it for me. And I learned that when character is tested, the loudest victory is often the one spoken in complete silence.